They are. Stop doing bad things. Start doing useful things. I don't know why they didn't think of that before, really. Okay. So we have, we've got 45 minutes. So we've got plenty of time, plenty of points, lots of hands already. Have we got microphones? Good about. Excellent. Okay. So maybe we start over here. There's a couple of hands here in the middle.
Very quickly, should we emulate Argentina?
Yeah. So are we actually in a centralized planning planning policy, like a Soviet government with all this policy? I think every single speaker has spoken about regulation and policy, holding everything back. But no one has really addressed undoing years and years of cascading policy and regulation. Is there actually any mechanism that we can have to undo these years and years of actually meaningless regulation? Just look at HS2 as the perfect example of regulation gone bonkers.
Is it time to change how we measure economic performance? So the panel spoke a lot about GDP per capita rather than GDP. But what about unemployment? At the moment, it's people actively looking for work and not people who dropped out of the labour force, which is a big issue.
There seems to be a consensus on the panel that the state is too big. That's probably right. But can I get a concession from the panel that the state is too inept? And I'll just give you two examples. Energy first. We do produce too little energy, too high price, too reliant on imports. But I think the cause of that is partly state ineptitude, in that it did very well when we had the CGB. Actually, grid energy expanded throughout. We had a very good system, and it failed under privatization and an objection, an abandonment of planning. Secondly, housing. I think a primary cause of the housing crisis is the deliberate destruction of state sector capacity in house building.
Okay, very good point. Well made.
Okay, just a quick question. Everybody on the panel, most people on the panel are talking about too much state spending, etc., as being the problem. What I want to just, I am going to push back on that a little bit, actually, because the same argument was made at the end of the Brown government by the incoming Cameron government, and they imposed austerity for about a decade or so. And my understanding is that is not only did it fail to actually reverse the economic decline, but my understanding is that the UK's credit grade rating got downgraded twice. So,
excellent, good. I like a bit of disagreement from the floor. So we're going to go to you, and then I'll take that person was really keen in the middle, his hand up, and then I'll come back to the panel. Off you go.
Yes, I accept that we are better off than previous generations, but isn't the real problem that future generations, that our children are not necessarily or highly unlikely to benefit from the rising living standards and wages that we have, and that any sort of growth in the last, say, 20 years has been negligible compared to what happened in the last 50 years. And the other thing is that often growth is a result of a decline in jobs. So companies become more productive by getting rid of workers. And isn't it a fact that if we get rid of much more workers by replacing them with technology, which then increases the profits of the companies, isn't it such that we will end up with so many people out of jobs that taxes would have to rise in order to cover the living costs of all those people that are thrown out of work because of this drive for productivity?
Excellent point, well made.
Okay, thanks. So I'm a conservative activist, and please don't hold it against me. I think one thing we haven't touched on is just how our financial weakness is bleeding into strategic weakness. It just seems to me that as a country forever trying to live beyond our means, it makes us very vulnerable to being importuned by the powerful and wealthy, and China is a great example of that. I have to say, though, as someone who knocks on a lot of doors, I don't find many people who are concerned about the same issues that we are in this room are concerned about, and I don't find much appetite for the sort of solutions which would be necessary to fix the problems that we're talking about. So I would be interested in the panel's view on how do we explain to people, how do we, the received wisdom, I think, in politics is a financial crash needs to come along and that will educate everybody. To me, that's a counsel of despair. I think it should be possible to get ahead of that and persuade people what the benefits are of living in a growing economy, which I think we've forgotten because we haven't seen one for so long, and that will condition them to endure the downsides of what might be necessary to achieve that goal. But I'm very interested in the panel's advice to the political class, not to me as a conservative politician, but to political class generally who do care about this. How do we bring the public on board and get them to vote for measures which will fix these problems? Ultimately, is the only way to get them solved. Thank you.
That's a great question. Great note on which to come back to the panel. So panel, maybe I'll come to you in the opposite order.
I mean, I think a lot of people do like the Javier Milei style of direction of slashing government or whatever, but it's not without problems, as you see with him visiting the White House to ask for $20 billion. It's not going to be a smooth ride by any stretch of the imagination. I just really would echo Jon's point about regulation. I mean, there's so much just stupid regulation that we can't get things built. I mean, the bat tunnel on HS2 is just the craziest example of it. But, the fact that, anything you want to build now needs a 4,000-page environmental assessment report because a newt might be caught up by building it it's just ridiculous. And we have to really emphasize human welfare in the fact that we want these things. We want new infrastructure. We want new power stations and so on. I'm not sure about measuring economic performance apart from, I mean, I think it's good to stick to some kind of, GDP and these things because you get a sort of historical sense of where we are. With the proviso that I mentioned about how do we measure the free stuff, it's people are working on it, but it is an interesting question. State ineptitude, I would agree with William here about that, but I wouldn't be too rose-tinted about the idea of planning the CEG, but the old, was it the Central Electricity Generating Board that you mentioned, and council housing. I mean, the market works pretty well at developing these things if we don't skew it by saying you must have more renewable energy and we are going to stuff the renewable energy producers' mouths with gold. As we discussed yesterday in the session on energy bills, we're spending a stupendous amount of money on producing unreliable and expensive electricity, and we've just got to stop doing that. Even if we just stop where we are, that would be a benefit rather than keep continuing to plough down this route and make it easier to build things like nuclear power stations and consider, we have to have a plan. So I accept that. For example, with gas, we're going to need gas for years, but we haven't got a plan. As Catherine Porter pointed out, it takes 8 years to get a new gas turbine for a power station. We've got no plan about building new gas-fired power stations, right? And the ones that we've got are getting old. So we do need a government to think about these things. In terms of product, I mean, I'm skipping a few things.
It leaves something for somebody else.
All right, okay. The last point, then, the productivity and jobs. Yes, AI could take away a lot of jobs. It'll create lots of new jobs for AI report checkers. Didn't some big consultancy firm just get very embarrassed this week about the fact that they produced a report and obviously used lots of AI in it, and there were lots of basic errors in it. So there'll be people like me who could potentially become AI report checkers, and I think that could be a growth industry.
Yeah, there was. You made me think of the Canadian government commissioned a very large, expensive report for some academics that took 18 months about ethical use of AI in education, written by 2 professors, and then it was found that at least 15 of the references were fabricated, suggesting it had been done by AI. So that's the most glorious story. All right, Karl. I mean, Rob has conveniently covered a number of those points. So pick up, but you are allowed to cover some of the ones.
I'll please move it up. Firstly, on the point about how centralised is the UK economy, centralised planning, are we moving towards the Soviet system? It used to be the case that the commanding heights of the economy were nationalised. We had very extensive prices and incomes policies setting wages across the economy, trying to control inflation by setting prices. We don't do that anymore, mostly. But I think the high tide of economic freedom in this country was probably the late 90s, and we are moving back towards that. In the energy market now, we have the price cap. In the labour market, we have a minimum wage, which has been very deliberately driven up towards 66% of the median wage. And we now have, for example, equalities laws, which are being interpreted by judges to set prices. This is partly what bankrupted local government in Birmingham. It's a big threat to chain stores like Next and some of the supermarkets. Instead of using sort of nationalised companies and even tax and spend to direct the economy these days, we increasingly try and achieve social goals through regulation. So there's a 2012 Social Value Act, which is how the government does procurement, and that adds enormous costs to the state. So I think, yes, we are moving towards a more centrally planned system, and what all of these things have in common is they are destroying the price mechanism, which is how information about supply and demand is coordinated in markets. So I think that is disastrous. And I think, as I've touched on, that is obviously bound up with this question of the regulatory state, and the question raised over here about it's not just about the size of the state, but also how effective the state is. And what we should be aiming for, in my view, is a small but strong state that does the core functions it should be able to do well. So, if your phone does get stolen, the police will deal with that. We won't have overflowing prisons. We will have an efficient health service. We can get the basics right in a way we can't now, because there are so many sort of subordinate goals and such a sprawling bureaucracy. In terms of how we go about fixing some of that, which was one of the questions asked, I think partly that's about structures of government, so trying to bring quangos and other arms length bodies back into departments so ministers have more oversight, so that they can actually pull levers and make things happen. But so much of it is going to be about going back through decades of legislative build-up, both primary and secondary legislation, and repealing that. And that means actually what we need more than anything else is good lawmakers who spend time in Parliament scrutinising legislation, don't add more to it, use sunset clauses on new legislation. But it is a mammoth task. And then maybe it wasn't just Rob, but the other point on austerity. I mean, I take the point there, but I think austerity was kind of a strategic, as a term, was a strategic misnomer, a mistake by the Conservatives. Austerity is what happens after you've bankrupted your empire, fighting a global total war, and you're trying to build a new Jerusalem in the ruins left by the Blitz. Austerity is not holding spending steady in real terms over a decade, which is what happened in the 2010s. The problem with how cuts were implemented is there were a few ring-fenced departments, then you had salami slicing year on year off over other areas. And this completely destroyed some core state capacity, particularly in the area of courts and justice. And again, I think this goes back to the earlier question about the size versus the capacity of the state. You need it smaller, but you need it to do better things. And therefore, when you are thinking about how do we cut spending, you do need to think strategically about what matters and what to prioritise, and try not just to be led by actually what is electorally popular or not popular. People always want healthcare spending to go up. People always want pensions to go up. These things simply aren't affordable.
Okay, thank you very much. Jon, what would you like to?
Thank you. Well, the first question was about Argentina, and should we emulate it? I would argue yes, but that is a necessary, but in no way a sufficient thing to do. Now, as I think Rob said, well, Argentina is having problems. The main reason they're having problems is what every Argentinian government has had the problem with, is trying to protect their currency. And interestingly, that is the problem we had from 1945 onward, with conservative government after conservative government trying to get growth, but at the same time trying to keep the value of the currency up. It's impossible to do that, and
you can see that was catastrophic. That's one of the main reasons we haven't grown. So yes, we should emulate Argentina, but no, we won't be able to defend our currency, and it will go down because we are poorer. And that'll lead to us all being poor. It'll lead to increased inflation. It'll lead to all sorts of problems. But that's going to happen. And one of the big questions is whether we will reach what they call the Millet moment prior to the next election, when everybody gets so absolutely fed up that they're prepared to vote for the most radical things. And at the same time, people talk about an IMF moment, where the IMF has to come in, like Healy called them in 1976, I think, 5, 6. Now, what I'm hearing out of the IMF, whisper, is, mates, you're on your own. Don't think we're going to give you any money to bail your economy out. We're busy, bailing out Millet and other people, but not you. Not you. You've made your bed, now go and lie in it. So there's a very interesting question that the IMF will not impose all these restrictions on us. We're going to have to impose them on ourselves. So where will the grown-ups be in the room? And will they happen before or after the next election? Because here's the problem. We've all agreed what is depressing the economy and economic growth. But every single step that you want to take is electorally unattractive. So if you say I'm going to cut the civil service in half, if you say benefits for an unemployed person, talking about unemployed people, is going to have to go down to 1/2 or 1/3 of what they are getting in order for them to be incented to go and get a job. If you say that, it's all massively electorally. You're bastards. You're George Osborne doing austerity. You don't like the youth, and all of that. So that wise would have been interesting to have Richard Tice here. Is reform going to come up with an economic policy, because they ain't come up with one whatsoever right now, that acknowledges these problems and commits to being the grown-up in the room? Because if they do, they know that they are much, much less likely to get elected. And we got 3 years to go. So there's your problem, which is really problematic, because if they don't say they're going to do it, then it's not in their manifesto. If it's not in their manifesto, then the House of Lords is going to be able to trash them. Now, in order to prevent the House of Lords trashing them, they have to put in 500 peers. Or the current way peers are done, 2 a week, that means it's going to take over 5 years to get all those peers in, by which time they've lost the next election. So, before they've got the 500 peers in, all of those Lib Dems, Labour, Crossbench, all those people who have a natural majority in the Lords will be in the way of reform getting any of its stuff through. And so they've got a real dilemma. Do they put in a manifesto, in which case House of Lords is not allowed to interfere, or do they not? Because if they do, they'll not attract the electorate. Now that point about do we have to look after the youth? Well, yeah, that's a problem. But don't forget that in 1800, 90% of the people worked on the land, and now it's like 3% work on the land. You've got to allow natural changes to take place in the workforce, otherwise you've had it. And as Rob said, the way what a young person gets these days is just unbelievably fantastic compared to what we had when I was a child.
You were lucky.
Is the state inept? Of course it's inept. And by the way, the GNP growth numbers, whether straight or per capita, are goosed by the fact that we've been increasing the size of the state. Because every time you add a civil servant, and we're adding thousands a week, still, every time you add a civil servant, GNP goes up because you're paying them, and that's economic activity. Now, if you take away the economic activity that's the goose from the increase in the size of the state, you find that the private sector has grown less than 1% GDP per capita for the last 25 years. hasn't grown much at all. And of course, goosing the economy by increasing the size of the state has an end point at some point. I mean, the French are testing that at 50%, 57% of GDP right now. But anybody who thinks that the state, a large state, is good has to look at the worst growing major economic bloc in the world, the European Union, and with massive youth unemployment, with all sorts of problems. Do we want to emulate that? Because that's the way we're going right now. We're halfway to rejoining the EU with all its problems. I better just stop whittering, hadn't I?
Get Jas back at you.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm asked on these panels, and I do come every year, and sometimes I do quite a few of them because I am a bit different to others because I am in favour of the EU. And also of the type of immigration that was coming from the EU, which was on average about 270,000 a year, and actually did add to productivity because there were single men coming and then going back again. And they were very heavily employed. They were much more employed than the indigenous population, if you want to call it that. And of course, it all changed when we left the EU, and a lot of serious shortages emerged in various areas, and we had indeed the skills visa, which has been very expensive. So I do agree that the way that we have gone and done policy has been completely wrong in the sense of putting extra cost to businesses to bring these people in. And even the Home Office itself, in its appraisal, has calculated that the cost of the new skill visas would add something like 40 billion to companies over 10 years, which is huge. If you add to that, of course, the other policy issue, which is not the NIC one, which adds, quite considerably as well, and the National Insurance Company, you add the new labour laws, which are going to come into effect at some point, that's another 5 billion. So you add all those, and I do agree with Jon before that what you do as a result is you really disadvantage businesses. And what we did see in the second quarter is a drop in business investment. So just going back to what was said before. So are we becoming more of a centrally planned state? It is interesting to look at what's happening in particular sectors of the economy. The train operators, train is now becoming renationalized. If you look at water, all sorts of possibilities are out there. What's going to happen to Thames Water, I don't know. But of course, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with all that. There's been a review by John Cunliffe. We're talking now about maybe getting rid of the regulator and having perhaps something else. And there's actually a look now at loads of regulators. Are they doing the right thing? In my view, though, it's not are they over-regulating, but are they actually under-regulating in a number of areas, which have left people with huge costs to bear because they didn't actually go and invest when they should have done, various companies, and now they're coming back. Steel is another area which is now being basically taken over by the state. So you could argue that these are things that perhaps hadn't been planned, but actually the policy wasn't right in terms of regulating those sectors. Planning that was mentioned and asked about, it's interesting that this government anyway has been quite prepared to be flexible on this. And I was just reading in the papers yesterday that in fact for London to get the councils to build more, there are discussions now with Sadiq Khan to make sure that he also accepts a reduction in environmental regulations. And even thing I had not quite realized that new houses have to have windows in two different directions because that way you get less damp inside and all that sort of stuff. But somehow or other we seem to be prepared to scrap that requirement. Possibly that's the discussion going on. In addition, and that's rather unfortunate, the requirement of developers to have to provide a certain percentage of affordable housing alongside what they do. So that could be reduced. That would be interesting. On the other hand, you do need these houses to be built. And we do have indeed the shortage that was mentioned before. So there are some moves. But where, of course, we seem to be quite keen to deregulate, which I'm worried about, because, of course, we have been through one financial crisis and we've seen how bad that has been. At least in our living memories. Of course, there was another one, in the early part of the 20th century, is deregulating the financial sector. including bonuses, the way that this is developing, including taking away some of the regulations, even on the consumer front. And allowing lots of IPOs to happen in different ways. So that is a bit of a concern for me in terms of where we might move and whether we're going to be suddenly heading towards a crisis. But I do agree, the HS2 mention. HS2, when I was working for the government, wasn't value for money then. And it's now even less value for money. So if I were a politician, I would just stop it where it is. There is a thing of sort of sunken cost, but which the economists all talk about. You don't want to carry on spending if you're going to be worse off increasingly by doing so. So I'm not very popular with any party by suggesting that, but I really think most economists you would talk to would say it doesn't make any sense. So stop that and use it for something else that we really absolutely need. And then on jobs and productivity, if I may. It's interesting about AI. What we find so far is that actually AI has not done anything for productivity for the economy as a whole, which is really interesting and worrying. What seems to happen is that smaller firms use AI to just get rid of one or two people, or three or whatever, and use technology to be able to survive, basically, because they have all these other issues to with. The bigger ones are the ones that are using AI to expand and perhaps develop new things. And the real worry is that what you end up with is that all the benefits of AI go to some big firms, whereas the smaller firms can't compete. And what you know about productivity is that you need to have loads and loads of firms starting up and competing, because that is really the way in which you get productivity up. If you get this concentration, which is happening with the big IT firms, as we know, and nothing happens on the regulatory front to get them to be more open. I mean, AI, just to use it told me very, very confidently that Man U had won the match against Grimsby Town when they were playing the Carabao Cup, and they were therefore moving into the next stage. And I was very furious about it, almost didn't sleep all night. Well, the result was, of course, the truth is that Grimsby Town won 11-10 in penalties. So you can't rely on it for the moment to even give you the sort of more basic information that you really want to see, which is football results, really.
Yes, exactly.
If you can't get that, you can't get anything. But then we have the net zero issue, which, of course, is full of regulations and our bills and so on. Absolutely right that we're paying rather a lot for those. Ed Miliband on the Laura Kunzberg show, which I was listening to on the bus coming over to the concentration, whatever it is, the anger of everyone else on the bus. He was arguing that we're going to have 400,000 extra jobs because of this. Well, I can tell you, when I was joint head of the Government Economic Service, I was rung up by Number 10, when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, to say that the Number 10 wants to go out and say there will be 400,000 extra jobs because of net zero, because suddenly he had become, not net zero, green jobs, because we hadn't quite invented net zero then. And I said, 400,000 jobs? I mean, on what basis? Well, it's because we're going to be doing blah, blah. Well, I said, look, in most cases, these are going to be jobs that we're doing now, which are then going to be classified as green because we're going to be using different technologies, material, and so on. So I can't really say 400,000 jobs, just like that. Anyway, out they went and said 400,000 jobs. So I'm now talking about just before the financial crisis. 400,000 jobs has been used again and again and again ever since. This morning, Ed Miliband, 400,000 jobs. You talk about what to do to convince people. You've got to come clean, really, is one thing. And the other thing you've got to come clean about is that the main way, unfortunately, to raise money, if you really need it, to pay for people who don't die of heart attacks but actually carry on living, which is what's going on right now, which Rob was talking about, is to explain that actually it's through taxes to the working person. Income tax, national insurance contributions, which is shrinking up to a point but still very significant, and VAT. If you don't say that, if you don't explain that that's how it should be, and you're terrified of doing so, then you end up with all those things which are going to affect enterprise negatively and jobs and growth.
Correct.
Excellent. Right. We have somewhat over 10 minutes left. So I'm very keen to get as many of you in as possible. So I'm going to please keep your comments pithy. And then panel, brace yourselves. You're not going to be able to answer anything, but you'll get a minute each to sum up. So where are the microphones? Let us start. So you give your microphone to, there's a hand, actually, yeah, that one there. There's also one behind you.
Thanks. It was a great discussion. I think you've been too optimistic, though. I'm sure you guys are all aware of this, but you've got into the situation over a long period of time, a generation or so. It's going to take at least a generation to dig ourselves out of this hole. There's all sorts of reasons. Don't need to explain what they are, but I'd be very interested to know seriously how long you think it will actually take. And to me, what Rob was saying about net zero, that's got to go. That's got to be fundamental to everything else. And if that doesn't happen, I just don't understand how we can dig ourselves out of this. But seriously, how long
will it take
to do it?
Okay, good.
Okay, so I'd like your opinion on what does our current work culture mean for growth? Because we are very happy to discuss as a nation mental health, stress, work-life balance, lots of DEI training, but safetyism, there's lots of risk assessment going on every time you want to propose anything. We never talk about being risk averse, having the drive, the ambition, wanting to compete. We never talk about these things as really good things for growth.
Yeah, if panelists base their choice purely on the economy, and we accept Jon's point that parties can't always be fully honest in their manifestos, then which potential leader do the panels have the most faith in to handle the challenges ahead? Kemi Badenoch, Nigel Farage, or David Lammy?
Fair. Okay, so give that one to Zeta, and over to you.
Is unskilled migration worth the money we spend on it?
Okay, excellent, pithy. Over to you now.
Tony Brown, shouldn't we apply LAFA and stop the absurd linear conclusions about tax take increasing when behavioural responses ensure that none of it's going to happen?
Excellent and very pithy. Good. Yeah.
We seem to be focusing a lot on GDP, and I wonder if we should be introducing wellness indicators. In New Zealand, we introduced the wellness indicators enshrined in statute. The current government, sadly, has done away with it, but it's all about long-term thinking, both in terms of health as well as economics, thinking 30 to 50 years out. So wellness indicators, I want to promote more and less GDP.
Okay, excellent in combination with that earlier question about culture. I can't see. Has someone got the microphone there? Yes. Okay, so we're going to go over here and then we'll come to you.
Why are so many proponents of the free market, especially Brexiteers, so anti-free trade, especially when it comes to import tariffs? And another thing in terms of barriers to entry and why bigger firms grow larger at the expense of newcomers. A lot of founders in London are struggling to hire top global talent because of bureaucratic immigration processes. Are these not inhibitors to the free market?
Excellent. I'm loving these really good, pithy questions. You're not going to get to answer them. Never mind. Okay.
Hi. As the former national organiser and head of operations for Reform, I can assure you that there are a couple of things that Reform are really concerned about. One is how they get 2 terms. And the other one is how they actually make the blob, the civil service, the quangos, and the regulation that is the serious threat to this country. And if we don't cure it, we are going down the toilet. That is their biggest concern, that even though they become the government, they're going to have to repeal laws in order to be able to implement a non-independent civil service that will have to then do as they're told again. And now, of course, you've just implied that the House of Lords would turn against them if it's not in the manifesto. But obviously, one of the things that they are looking to do is to reform the House of Lords, possibly to get rid of it altogether.
Okay, excellent. Give that microphone to that guy there, just in front of the pillar, and then I'm afraid that's it.
Take 5 years to... Thanks a lot. It seems to me that inflation has been one of the most damaging things to ordinary people in terms of wiping out their spending power, wiping out their savings. I go to the supermarket, I see the despair in people's faces. I noticed quantitative easing hasn't been discussed on the panel yet today. So my question to you guys...
I spoke about quantitative tightening.
Okay. My question would be is that a necessary evil or is that a highly destructive measure?
Okay. So, Vicky, your minute starts now.
Oh, my God. Well, on quantitative easing, I did talk about quantitative tightening now because of everything we collected on the balance sheets of the banks. But actually, we did as much quantitative easing as everyone else, actually. Us and the US in particular. But also Europe overall, huge amount. And in fact, they have not been doing as much selling of the bonds as we have. They have lower inflation than we do. So a lot of what we've seen on inflation is caused by other things in the UK and not by that. Number one. Number two, on wellness, yes, it sounds wonderful, but it doesn't get you anywhere. So you might as well just ask people, are you happy or not? And then you get some idea about that. And if you don't actually know what's happening underneath all this, it is absolutely true. We don't measure GDP properly. A lot of say, a woman who stays at home, that doesn't count, whereas someone who hires somebody, it does. So that adds to GDP, which is really interesting. On migration and on the cost of migration, absolutely right. I did speak about the cost of the skills visas we have now. The interesting thing about having open migration is that as a firm, even a small firm, you can actually bring in whoever you want as long as they can then go back, which is exactly what was going on when we were in the EU. It meant that you can expand without worrying about increases in wages. And that is really what helped keep inflation low for so many years. And then, of course, we reversed that by leaving the EU. So there is an issue about how you do your migration and how you control it. And you're absolutely right. The LAFA one, I'm sorry if I can say, yes, of course, one of my people I worked with, Doug McWilliams, has produced this book with LAFA. There is quite a lot to be said for it. But their plan that I looked at for growth does not include any way in which you can raise any revenue. It seems to be mostly on what you can cut rather than what you can increase your revenue on. Okay.
Thank you very much. Very pithy. Okay, John.
Vicky introduces Doug McWilliams, one of the few good economic forecasters. He has an article in today's Telegraph. By 1950, Britons will be poorer than Poles, Turks, and Malaysians. Unbelievable, but also correct. Now, somebody asked, well, how long will it take before we can turn this around? Well, let me offer you a historical analogy. Rome had the most fabulous banking system. You could do what you can do today in terms of asking for money in Spain and giving it to somebody in Lebanon or whatever. It was a really well-developed, fabulous banking system. In the year 260 AD, all mention of banking in documents in the Roman Empire disappear because the banking system disappeared. And it didn't reappear for 1,000 years. That's the Dark Ages. Okay, I'll go very quickly. DEI, etc. You've got to get rid of the European Court of Human Rights. They're quite tricky. Who's the best leader? And it's comparative, so I don't say she's good or bad, but it's Kemi right now in terms of what she's doing. Free trade, quantitative easing, it's all in here, folks. And I'm agreeing with what you're saying. We know best is what wellness is all about. No, we know best about whether you're well or not. No, put money in people's pockets by growing GDP, and they'll be happy people, and let them spend it how the hell they like. And finally, I'm with Vicky that those people who came to us from the EU were great for us, and I want them back. And they were refugees from the EU, Vicky, not importing the EU to us.
Loads of Greeks.
And our problem with immigration is that we're allowing huge amounts of family immigration, which does absolutely nothing for GDP.
Excellent, thank you. Oh, you're 90 seconds left
Yeah.
now.
I mean, as Adam Smith said, there is a great deal of ruin in a nation. I think it's entirely true that so much of what has gone wrong with the economy in recent decades is self-inflicted. There are demographic headwinds, there are geopolitical headwinds, and yet we have made bad decisions again and again and again. So in terms of how long will it take to get back on track and undo that, I think that is a generational thing. And another historical analogy here, and it's a very tried one, is the 1970s into the 1980s. Margaret Thatcher's first term, macro stabilisation, second term, defeat the unions, third term, you're getting onto privatisation and public sector reform, and that continues through the 1990s. But really, that's a sort of 10 to 20 year programme, and I think that's what we need in this country. But we need, I think, in many ways, a better political class that's able to deliver that. We require better legislators, better ministers, better structures around that. But I am optimistic about young people coming to politics these days, much younger than me, I should say. And I think there is a lot of energy. So I am still positive that though things really, really are bad and getting worse for now, we can still turn them around in time.
That's the spirit. Okay, Rob, you've got 90 seconds to take us or send us forward into the rest of the day of discussion. Off you go.
Well, I think some things can be turned around quite quickly, actually. I think net zero is something that we could rein back in. We can,
no heckling now. He's got little enough time as it
as
is.
we were discussing in the energy bill session, you can get rid of some of these subsidies relatively quickly. You'll be bankrupting some renewable energy providers.
Excellent.
C'est la vie. Which leader? Well, I would say the Conservatives have taken a more serious line on this, but I don't trust them after 14 years of screwing it up, so I don't know about that. Tariffs, nobody's mentioned, but don't worry, because there's a session called Is There a Case for Tariffs today, which I'll be chairing in this room straight after lunch, so do come along, featuring William Clouston and others. And one form of regulation I would like to see is enforcing headphones on buses so that people like Vicky Pryce can't disturb the honest citizenry of this country. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you to a fantastic panel and to all of you for your brilliant